When you think about students you've seen over the years who really did best with their job search, what are the things about them that stood out to you? What are the things they did differently?
Yeah, this is something I've thought about, and I think really something that is important. So it's a great question. Without just repeating the common tactics of sort of strong job search, which is network strategies, research, etc. Here are a few things that really stood out for me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Career Starter Podcast. My name is Ashley Mesquita and I'm your host. If you've already subscribed to the show, thank you very much. But if you're new, please go ahead and subscribe because today, like every day, I'm going to be bringing you amazing guests and we're going to uncover the tips and strategies that will help you get your dream job. And once you're in that job, help you launch your career and accelerate it like a rocket ship. All right, Garth. Well, listen, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Let me introduce Garth briefly here. So Garth is at Ivey Business School. Garth's a seasoned executive. He's got over 20 years experience in financial services, post-secondary education, professional development industries. His expertise includes strategic planning, client engagement, sales and business development. He's worked with renowned organizations like TD, Moody's Analytics, and of course, Ivey Business School. I've known Garth for quite some time now, and really great guy. And again, really appreciate you doing this, Garth. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Garth, why don't we kick things off with a little bit of a background on you? Tell us about, and give us a brief background of your history, and then maybe talk about, if you don't mind, what you're doing right now and what your current role is.
Sure. So I primarily worked in the financial services sector, including anywhere from starting a leadership development program at TD, and have worked through retail, commercial banking, wealth management, leadership positions within those areas. I've worked both domestically and globally. And I've worked for organizations like Moody's Analytics, which is part of the Moody's brand, in professional development and sales and business development. So long history of the financial services, enjoyable history. And what am I doing now, for example? Well, now I work for Ivey Business School, and I've worked here for the last 5 years. I'm an associate director of corporate recruiting at Ivey Business School. What I basically do is bridge the gap between top industry employers and our talented students, let's say. My role involves managing and cultivating relationships with domestic and global companies. What that is in ensuring that they have access to Ivey's best talent. I also provide strategic insights on market trends to both our corporate partners and student-facing teams, which helps them to shape the programs that align with the industry needs. So by working cross-functionally, with internal stakeholders, I contribute to initiatives that enhance the school's reputation and its global rankings. And so, ultimately my focus is really on maintaining a strong recruitment pipeline, driving new business development to support our MBAs, MSc, and HBAs. So all the 3 programs that we have in Ivey.
For people who are not familiar with Ivey Business School, why don't you take a moment, brag about your program and your students for a minute or two, maybe talking about it in the context of why would people want to come into your program and why should companies want to recruit there?
Sure. Perfect. Ivey Business School is part of Western University, as you know. It's renowned for shaping future leaders, who excel in the real world. Our students sort of really undergo rigorous case-based learning that bodes well for, and it really bodes well for their critical thinking, their leadership, problem-solving skills, making them well-equipped to tackle sort of complex business challenges. Ivey is sort of consistently ranked among the top business schools globally, and we really have a strong focus on experiential learning and global perspective and an entrepreneurial mindset. One of the things that stands out a lot to me, and it would stand out to a lot of people out there, is our alumni network spans over 30,000 professionals worldwide, which provides our students with sort of unparalleled access to the global community of industry leaders. These are companies that recruit from Ivey that, they benefit from high-end graduates who are really not only academically brilliant, but also demonstrate resilience, adaptability, and the ability really to sort of thrive in the world and under high pressure environments. Now, what's good about corporations partnering with Ivey? When you partner with Ivey, these corporations tap into a talent pool that is diverse, driven, and ready to make, we always say, an immediate impact in today's fast fast-paced business landscape.
Outstanding. Sounds good. Can I get back in there after a few years out in the working world?
You're more than welcome, Ashley. You're one of the people that we will roll out the red carpet for.
That's very kind of you. You hit on a couple of things there we're going to touch on later, but I thought were very interesting.
So,
The importance of the alumni network and taking advantage of just such a robust network.
correct.
And then the idea of resilience. But I'd love to actually, maybe we'll start with this idea of resilience. I think it's incredibly important.
Right.
One of the things that always strikes me is that as you move through life, and you don't think about it when you're a student, when you're young, but life throws curveballs at you.
Yeah.
People get sick, people lose their jobs, people have challenges in their lives, and the ability to be resilient, the experience with that is incredibly important, and to be able to pick yourself up. Is there anything you would point to that you think helps your students or students in general build resilience?
Yeah, I think one of the things is the students come to us under a situation where it takes a lot to get into Ivy. To penetrate that market, the market of getting into Ivy, you sort of start really early in your life. So there's an element of resilience in there. So yes, Ivy students stand out because they've been going down a path that already has them building on resilience. But it's really on things like getting involved in the community, getting involved in projects, getting involved in leadership roles. And, actually really work. A lot of times when I see resilience is those students who have had this life where they've done sort of part-time work while they're going to school, for example, summer jobs, etc. So when they come out, I always like to use the terminology, they're hungry, right? So, and that bodes well for not just coming into Ivy, but when they leave Ivy. So we're developing those types of students from very early with the help of parents and communities, etc.
Great. Let's then maybe shift gears back to sort of some of my original questions I'd been thinking of ahead of time, and we'll sort of incorporate some of the stuff you talked about. Let's start at a high level. When you think about students you've seen over the years who really did best with their job search, what are the things about them that stood out to you? What are the things they did differently? And just the context of the question, right? Because our podcast is geared towards helping students get their dream job, so that prior to work part of their career, and then how to really accelerate their career once they start their job. But in the context of getting that job they want, what are the best students you've observed?
Yeah, this is something I've thought about, and I think really something that is important. So it's a great question. Without just repeating the common tactics of sort of strong job search, which is networks, strategies, research, etc. Here are a few things that really stood out for me. So one, intentionality, targeting industries, companies that are of genuine interest based on your own experiences, your interests, your values, etc. This intentionality really plays into sort of components of the job search, like the application documents, networking, sharing your own stories, values, etc. But building off this would be having focus. It's all right to have multiple interests, but be able to prioritize your efforts and time accordingly. So that's the intentionality aspect. And how about trying something different, sort of not afraid to carve out your own path and try something different to shake things up, for example, We've had students who wrote an article in one of the Ivy institutes that they were connected to with industry professionals. They continue to build that relationship with to expand their networking opportunities. Not as students sort of hit the ground running. And I mean, use that terminology, that comment over and over. Hit the ground running and began applying to banking, retail roles in person, literally walking into the bank and handing a physical resume. I don't think you remember that, Ashley, but I did some of that. Yep. And they ended up talking with a branch manager, for example, who along that path has been a mentor, and an ally for them in connecting with opportunities more suited for their experience and education. So sort of those simple, trying something different tactics and, being resourceful, for example, reflecting on what's worked well for you in the past or what, you've already done, learning, kind of leaning into building off of that, right? Over those successes, how can you sort of take that further? Because, sometimes that could mean just following back up on leads that didn't end up in a position, when you didn't end up in a position in the past. But, nonetheless, the leads, networks, to maintain, always keep that pipeline going. And we used to call it, well, people still call it the Rolodex, right? Have that out there, because you want to make sure that in the same realm, you want to be able to truly see the transferability of all these experiences, right? Your personal and your extracurricular, and not undermining those, for example, right? So, for example, there was a student that I heard a story from one of my career advisors, for example, that reached out to a professor, previous professor from years back, right? And because they were really engaged with their class and ended up getting connected to someone else in the banking industry. One of the things I notice is, I tell students sometimes is, I know you want to get into the big banks and the big financial institutions, but it's not bad getting into the smaller private equity firms. I'm just using that as an example, because a lot of those folks who have started those firms and who run those firms came from a domestic and a global, many years working with the big players, the Morgan Stanleys, the JP Morgan, the TDs, the RBC, etc. So, but if you work with them, you will actually be having closer conversations than if you were just working in a huge organization where you're disconnected from top executives and stuff like that. But they also can give you great advice one-on-one. You might be in a desk very close to them. You may go out for drinks or whatever, food, lunch. And not only that, they can also refer you and sponsor you, right? They refer you to key people in the industry. And the last one is really understanding sort of the other perspective, Students have been able to understand the company's perspective when it comes to understanding their needs, empathizing with their priorities, sharing a genuine interest in the company's sort of development, challenges, growth, how they're involved in the community, have stood out to me. Those students who do that, they've stood out to me and have been successful, because it's really made the approach with these companies more genuine and thoughtful and sort of intentional. You know what I mean?
100%. There's so much great stuff in there, Garth. You're clearly the right person to talk to.
Experience.
Exactly. I was listening to a podcast recently, and the guy provided this contrast between perception and perspective of how,
Yes.
On one hand, I've got my perception, I'm seeing outwards, but someone from the other end is looking from a perspective. And I think I'm probably butchering it a little bit, but the idea being thinking about things from the other side's perspective, from what are their needs? What is it, they know you want the job, but what is it that you can do for them? How do you help them solve their problems? And so I think that's a really, really interesting point, but particularly the intentionality one. I think that's a very important nuance that is often overlooked because you can craft a job search where you do a series of things that give you some options. It doesn't mean only one narrow thing, but if you do it in an intentional way, it can open a series of doors, but you probably are not wanting to just spray and pray and apply everywhere and hope for the best.
100%. I love that. I love that analogy.
There you go.
That's exactly it right there.
So how do you approach helping students in your program? I mean, you clearly have a lot of insight. You clearly have a lot of experience. You talk to employers. How do you go about helping students develop from, I just arrived, I'm full of enthusiasm, I'm highly motivated. You bring in very strong candidates and help them develop these skills to become ready and capable and successful in their job search?
So I think it's because of our robust career management department at Ivey Business School. It sort of stands out to most. And, I don't want to boast, but I am. I've spoke to a lot of other career management and folks out there, my colleagues, and what we offer to me, and I've seen a lot, even in my own university, I've seen a lot that we offer here at Ivey, which is a lot different to most. And I'll just give you an example, We're really dedicated to supporting career aspirations of all the students across our 3 programs. And that's an MBA, a Master's in Science in Management, and our Honors in Business Administration program, our undergraduate degree. And here's how we approach it. We have personalized career coaching. Now, what that means is we provide one-on-one career coaching tailored to each student's sort of unique goals, strengths, and interests. Our career coaches help students identify their career paths, which I think is critical, because most don't know when they come in. They have an idea, but, we build it out. I think you mentioned that before, sort of doing a needs analysis in a lot of ways. And then we develop their personal brand. They help them identify those career paths, develop their personal brand. And what they do is they help them create strategic plans to achieve their professional objectives. We also industry aligned programming. And what that means is we design and deliver workshops, events, and resources that align with the latest industry trends and employer needs. What does this include? Resume building, interview preparation, networking strategies, and industry specific insights, ensuring our students are well prepared to succeed in their chosen fields. All right. So as you would know, a lot of our students head to these engagement events that firms have out there, right? So a lot of education, a lot of connections, etc. And we formulate strong employer partnerships. So what that means is we leverage our strong relationship with the top domestic and global employers. This is employers in different industries. We're not just talking financial services here, many different industries, right? So we leverage those relationships with these employers to connect with students with exclusive job opportunities that they have out there. Our team works closely with these companies to sort of understand their talent needs and match them with the right candidates from Ivy's diverse and really high potential, high skilled student body. Experiential learning. You probably have heard a lot about this. We emphasize really the real world experiences. If you do any research on Ivy, you will hear a lot of this. Real world experiences through, internships, projects, case competition, and that allows students to apply their classroom knowledge in practical settings, because that's what it's all about. And that's the thing about Ivy. We know we are academically sound, but that needs to be applied to practical settings, the practical world. So this hands-on approach ensures really that they're job ready and can make, an immediate impact in their careers. And I'll repeat, they hit the ground running.
Yeah. So Garth, let me ask you this. So a couple of questions there that jumped out at me. When you talk about personal brand, how do you recommend students try to build a personal brand? And what are if there's anything, like if you were to do 1, 2, and 3 thing, like what I was thinking 1, 2, and 3, what would you recommend to people?
Yeah, I would say, really understand yourself from where you are right now and where you want to go. And the way you're going to get to that point is you are going to need intervention by those who will listen to you. It's almost like from a counseling point of view. You're not going to do it on your own, in my opinion, right? So obviously when you come into Ivy Career Management, you get all this counseling, the benefits of coming to school like Ivy. But even outside of Ivy, listen to your network, listen to your connections, your closest friends, your neighbors, your family, etc. And really ensure that you are building a personal brand that's true and tried and really honest, because you may be thinking you're building your own personal brand, but you haven't spoke to many people to understand who you really are. A personal brand can come with not just listening to other people and counseling, but skilling up in some ways, taking some courses that are out there on that, in how to develop your personal brand, etc. There's a lot of, and of course, researching, etc. Listen to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, but you have to really take the initiative on your own. Yes, there's going to be support there, especially when you come into Ivy, but you need to take the initiative on your own and really be true to yourself.
And then when I think clearly you provide a lot of support for your students at Ivy. Let's say, because only a very, very small number of our audience probably is going to be going to Ivy. If you were to be guiding someone, and there's maybe 2 different ways to approach this. One is if you were guiding someone, and 2, if you were thinking about someone from another university who's in a comparable role, or it was a career coach at another university. And they said, Garth, we really need to level up our career coaching, and we have the bandwidth to sort of add like 2 or 3 elements to it. What would you tell them? How would you tell them that the most effective way they can help their students?
Yeah, they have to become very personalized. It can't be, cookie cutter. It really has to be a personalized approach to the students, first of all. You have to go above and beyond to help the students to connect with the right people, not just tell the students go out there and find somebody and connect and speak. How do the students do it? You remember, you're talking to students. You can be talking to experienced students, MBAs, for example, and some of our graduate students, but a bulk is really the HBs, right? The undergrads, and they're young, and we may have an assumption that they know more than we think they know, but you have to be there to guide them along the path and really, lay out this roadmap for them, because they need help, and you really need, so take an interest in them. Take an interest in them like they were your own kids or your nephews or your nieces or etc. Really, really make it genuine that, you're out there to help them, and not them show them how to click on this button, just go to this area without giving them any guidance. They need a lot of guidance.
I think that's such an important nuance,
Hand-holding,
right?
hand-holding, if you know what I mean.
I think it's such an important nuance because I come across a lot of students who will have heard you need to connect with alumni. And they're like, great, how do I do that? Like, what does that
Right.
look like? And so I think it's a very important nuance of, and then I guess so some of the key resources would be most career centers will have some sort of alumni database, I'm
Yeah,
guessing. And then
yeah, we
they'll
do.
be,
We do have alumni. I mean, the information is accessible. It's just how do you utilize it? Like we can tell anybody, go do this, go here, go there. But some of the students may say, okay, no problem. But in the back of their minds, they're thinking, how do I do this? And they're afraid to ask the question, right? So it may be better for you to say, okay, here are the resources. And let me show you a way of trying to utilize these resources efficiently, without, because they are young students coming in. Sometimes they feel they don't want to waste your time, etc. So you have to be there to really help.
it's funny, one of the things I'll chat about, I was chatting with someone about this yesterday, I think it was, and it's the idea that often people will be like, I want to find a mentor, but often mentors find you when
Mhm.
you're doing interesting things. And so one of those things is having the get up and go to go and reach out to those people and
Yes.
ask them questions about their career. And it's funny, right? Because if someone's a third year student, let's say they just arrived at IB or they're at another program, they can email an alum, and that alum might ignore their email if they're not interested in talking to students,
Right.
or they might say, "Yeah, sure, let's talk. Let's have a coffee."
Right.
What they won't say is, "Boy, it's so weird that a student's emailing me." It's completely normal. It's completely logical, understandable, and students, by being a student, you have default permission to do
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right. I am not student facing 100%, but students, as reach out to me by emails and LinkedIn and say a few two-liners and stuff like that. I am very open to that.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? I don't
yeah,
turn them off and say, hey, you shouldn't be really emailing me or whatever, right?
yeah,
This is their chance. And I look at it in this way. When you're a student, it's not a permanent thing in your life. It's an experience, right? It's a journey. And that journey should be effective. It should be enjoyable. It should be fun. It's going to be hard. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. But it is a journey that's not very long. So my objective is to ensure that I help them as much as possible through that journey, that short journey.
yeah. It goes by very quick.
It does.
Garth, when you think of students who have struggled,
Mhm.
what are the things, and you probably see things and you're just like, no, don't do that. Or they do something or they don't do something they should be doing. The people who you see struggle, is there anything you would highlight that they tend to have in common? The ones who struggle in the job search, I should say.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. I was going to go into life. I think, the bottom line is those who struggle in the job search, for example, sometimes don't do enough education on the level of effort that needs to be put into the job search. Not just physically or time wise and stuff like that, but in terms of what are they doing to help their job search be successful? Are they speaking to people who know about job searches and not been successful? Are they speaking to model individuals? Are they doing that research? And typically, the ones that struggle, in my opinion, are the ones who just dive in without doing the entire study period of it all to make themselves better. And then what happens is they find out, well, maybe I'm not really doing it the right way. The ones who spend some time, I'm not saying just spend all your time, but who spend time to be mindful of what it takes to be successful, those are usually the ones that
That is really interesting. I'm not sure I've heard it put that way before, but it makes so much sense. Yeah. Okay. Great. When you think about a resource that students would really benefit from using, now, of course, aside from the newsletter that I write, another resource besides that, is there anything you would point students to who are not necessarily Ivy students alone, but that are resources that are generally accessible that can help them with job search, that can help them with interview prep? Any thoughts on that?
well, I think, for example, not just a resource. I get to the resource. But let's say, for example, you want students to help themselves. I would say there's a couple of things that come to mind. Any action related to career job search, ask themselves why. If they can give a solid, authentic answer to why they're doing what they're doing, great. Then there's intentionality and thought behind it. If the answer is anything related to what others are doing, peer pressure, then they have to think different. Be able to say no, be able to say no to opportunities that don't genuinely speak to them, be able to say no to reaching out to someone at a company they don't feel genuinely curious to chat with. But when it comes to resource newsletter, anything like that, I am a big proponent of associations, for example, industry associations. How many times do students really use industry associations? And industry associations are connected. It's like an alumni, right? Alumni network. They're connected to the industry, to people in the industry, etc. They have all the information there on the industry, timely information, historical information, etc. Right? So I give you examples. Canadian Marketing Association, Retail Council of Canada, you have IAC, which is Investment Industry Association of Canada. You have you even have sustainability in organizations, etc. Women in capital markets. I think they've changed the name recently. Things like that, right? And it's not necessarily that you have to buy a membership in, because some of them don't have it, because some are free resources, webinars, networks, anything you could use sort of as a research tool, right? I don't think, the students get into that as much as they should. And of course, I go back to local alumni chapters, right? And, school initiatives. Ivy's a great example of how many internal resources they have, like the Morissette Entrepreneurship Center, for example, which is a way to connect and, learn about investors, for example, startups, not what you think to connect with them, but speaks to, sort of topic of trying something different and being resourceful. Another idea would be connecting with like PhD students researching a particular topic, for example, which may be an area of your interest, and the PhD student is happy to share that information, and you're lucky because they've done all the research. How neat will that be to be able to speak to them, about most current research, things that are being done in that space. And of course, you have the economic development corporations like London's LEDC, Calgary's Economic Development Corporation, things like that. So it's a big world out there. And there's a lot of resources out there that the students should be utilizing more of it.
I think those are some really interesting ideas, and particularly in the context of having a logical connection and reason to reach out to someone. So alumni is a straight line, right? Hey, I'm an alum, you're an alum, can I have a coffee with you? I'd like to learn about your industry and your job. Great. That's pretty straightforward. But connecting with people through industry association makes a ton of sense. That's a really interesting idea. Thanks for mentioning that, Garth.
A one-stop shop. A one-stop shop. I couldn't be more simple and direct on that.
Yeah.
And why not utilize it? There's another association that I know that's out there is really good, Canadian Association of Alternative Assets and Strategies, as CASA. Did I say the right way? But
I think so.
The bottom line is, these organizations, you'd be surprised at the information you get and the people you meet through these organizations.
Absolutely. No, those are great insight. Last one before we shift gears a little bit is I like to sort of approach these as sort of high level conversations, and then a couple of like, what can I do right now today to move the ball forward? When you think about students who you've seen who really stood out, both to you and then presumably they stand out to you, they're going to stand out to potential employers. Is there anything because that's a question I often get. How do I stand out in an interview? How does my resume stand out? Anything that you would sort of point to that you could suggest to people?
Yeah, I mean, and the terminology resume is, some firms don't use resume, right? They use other types of profile stuff and online stuff, So yes, to stand out is always a question that I think is so important. Whatever it is, if it's not a resume, whatever it is. But here's some specific ones that, someone shared that they created an Instagram account for pizza place reviews. So they sort of went around and evaluated different pizza places. This became a huge conversation starter, right? In the interviews. So what did you do? I heard a person, this guy I knew told me one time that he was doing a project on a startup company. So he became an Uber driver so that he could interview passengers on a regular basis, get feedback, surveys, and for the startup company that he was doing. And he just did it for that reason. He did it for 6 months. And I was like, wow, okay, that's very interesting. Another thing is sort of portfolios and website, if it applies to the industry you're targeting, because you see a lot of students with their own website, for example, and because they're doing some sort of company. It could be community work. It could be something that they did. And yes, I'm surprised at how many students I see who, let's say through scholarship applications and stuff, they've started this website and this little company, this startup, and then that keeps the conversation rolling when you're going into the so that you can, they say, hey, can you tell me a bit about that? Like, what was that about? And then if you could include, and these are things that come on these are things you see on students' resumes. So I want to be clear about that, right? You see this. So some of them have direct links to articles that they wrote, or mentioned in, for example, as part of, an experience that they've had on a resume, like club, for example, they went a club. All sort of conversation starters, right? Because they may just put it there on a resume in a very short form, and then you say, well, tell me a bit about this, and they expand, right? So they're very interested. And a lot of things are like independent learning, right? Then, they engage in particularly to that industry, like Bloomberg market concepts, simulations they partook in, not even necessarily, even if they didn't get an official certificate, but, you see more and more students, and we are actually involved with it at Ivey, with that extra competency learning, like Coursera, for example, so you see a lot of those things on their resume, right? Leadership certificates, SAP, or SAP, as you would call it, technical consultant, different things. You'd be surprised that those are the things on resumes to me that they may take a little extra effort, but they stand out.
Yeah, I think you had some great stuff there. It's encouraging to hear you're saying some of the similar stuff to what I counsel students about as well.
Right.
That whole links to articles they wrote, it's such a credibility builder. It's such a proof of work that I genuinely care about this job, this industry. And if you go back to something you mentioned earlier about a situation where you're essentially asked the question, why do you want to work in this company? Why this industry? And you need a better answer than I'm looking for somewhere to exchange my time for money, right? I've heard answers that essentially boil down to that, and those are generally not good enough because as a company, you're sitting there going, well, if you're not sort of even interested in what we do, then there's a reasonable chance you'll leave if things get a little difficult or whatever, and then I'm going to be right back in this situation. And so I think that's a really interesting point. I love that Instagram pizza place review because it combines something that often it feels like, oh, I have to do these, I spend all this time in school and I'm on the job search and then I have to do more job search related stuff. Here's something you can do that distinctive. It makes you stand out, and it can be something that's kind of fun for you. So that finding that overlap there. Now that's probably a marketing role, maybe not somebody who wants to do iBanking, but it's relevant and interesting. And that overlap, I love Venn diagrams for whatever reason. I've been talking about them recently. That overlap of I'm interested in this. It's kind of fun. I'm going to learn about it, about something useful, and it'll be good for my job search. And frankly, you can probably apply some of that to your classes as well and help you get better grades. So 100%. That's great. I love it. Thanks, Garth. That's some great insights there. So Garth, let's shift gears for the last few minutes of this conversation. One of the things we think about a lot on this podcast and in the content is that we create is how do we help students really, once they get that job, how do they accelerate into that job? We've seen, I'm sure you've seen people through your career who have a lot of potential, and for whatever reason, they just stall out early because of bad decisions or something they just didn't understand. And if they'd known about it, they might have approached it differently. So that's some of the stuff that I think is really important to think about, because conversely, you've probably seen people who, their career just takes off like a rocket. And whenever anyone looks at them, they're like, that person has star written all over them. And, I want to be able to try to help more people be able to have their careers launch like that. With that preamble, Garth is 22 years old again. He's starting his career right now. What advice would you give to Garth to be able to say, if you do these things, you massively increase the odds that you have a very rapid trajectory and positive trajectory?
Wow, loaded. One of the things I remember hearing Prince saying, the artist Prince saying, don't be like me. It stuck with me, actually. You don't have to do what I did. I remember him saying that. You don't have to do what I did. And I was thinking, hey, but you were pretty successful, so maybe I want to do what you did. One of the things I think to me, Ashley, is, you gotta be patient, but you gotta be also like a sponge, right? If I was 22 again, I wasn't very patient. I always tell people, I wanted to be the CEO of a bank in a year, so what did I do? What do you do to do that, right? Sometimes you just have to sit back, become a sponge, take your time, things happen, because through that process, what's happening is you're developing obviously more education on where you really want to go, more experience. as well as you're developing more connections that are very valuable, take you to that level. But it takes patience, right? It takes patience. I don't dissuade students from dreaming big. So I don't want to get, it really confused. I want you to dream big, dream huge, dream bigger than you've ever dreamed before, but sometimes extreme ambition could really trump patience. And that patience may have a whole lot of ROI, return on investment, in it that you didn't know about because there was that patience element of it, right? And you just were like, no, I'm not patient, right? And it can lead you. And sometimes when you don't have that patience, it leads you down an incorrect path. And that path could sort of stick with you and you sometimes can't get off the path. So I think it's important to really research different things, take the time, speak to the right people, speak to the right associations. It really is that level of, just like your 4-year degree and your 1-year MBA at Ivy or 2 years somewhere else, or even your PhD, that time really goes by really quick. So don't think that, like, when you get into the workplace that, well, you know what, I don't want to be in this job for 3 years or 4 years, because that's going to go by quick. And maybe 10 years in that industry might really help you even more as you move forward in your life. I mean, if you listen to the story of a number of, not going to call any names, but a number of CEOs here, and listen to their career journeys, and typically in the financial services industry and stuff like that, you'd be surprised at some of them. A lot of them were sort of this patient and climbing the ladder and stuff like that. So I don't dissuade people from being a little bit more patient.
So kind of a balance between patient and impatient to some
Yeah,
degree, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. A balance.
So I've always been fascinated by U.S. Navy SEALs and the incredible physical challenges and mental challenge they overcome to do what they do. And they have this saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Wow.
And I think that sort of, I hear some resonance of that with what you're describing as well.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly. I never heard that one, but thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Wow. Wow.
So that's that's something that always stood out to me. Anything else you would tell 22-year-old Garth?
Yeah, reach out. Reach out not just to industry people, reach out to your neighbor. Don't be afraid to discuss your goals and attributes and wants in life to your next door neighbors and those that are close to you, some of your family members, because you'll be surprised how they can actually help you with your career. When you think that the truck driver next to you, living next to you for many years, can't help you because you want to go into investment banking, how do you know who that person knows? How do you know the conversations that they have had? You'll be surprised at some of the things you can get out of that, right? So that can help you get through that, get to that goal of going into investment banking. And I think that's almost like when you just have tunnel vision, right? And you're not looking outside the box, you're not veering off the path, but you need to be diverse in your mindset and your thought process.
It highlights something else that I think is really interesting, and that is the um, I've run into people over my career who are of the view, and it's not like it's not an irrational and reasonable view, but if I just put my head down and do my job really well and don't talk to anybody else, things are out. And
Good luck.
you would intuitively say maybe that could work. In the
Maybe.
real world, it doesn't work that way.
Well, maybe, but what are the percentage odds on that? Like,
Right.
like it's like getting into professional sports, right? Like, how that is.
Totally.
So I agree with you 100% on that. Like, and that's the mindset of a lot of people.
And then it goes really sideways on you if your company is going through a restructuring and
Exactly.
you've done a great job, but your department is let go. And suddenly you don't know anybody else in the industry. You
That's
don't have
right.
a network. And suddenly you're like, oh, now I got to go build a network from scratch while I'm looking for a job. And so that makes it a little trickier. And so I think that I totally agree with you. I mean, that's kind of the advice, one of the pieces of advice I would give 22-year-old Ashley of
Yes.
do more reaching out, do more, building of networks in a reciprocal way. I love, have you ever read Adam Grant's book, Give and Take?
I have it right here.
I love that book. He's a prof at University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School, and he wrote this great book called Give and Take. And the basic premise is a lot of meat in it, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea of people who are givers who basically helping other people without the expectation or assumption that they're going to give
100%.
something directly back, the universe just seems to work out. But the caveat he put in is givers end up at the top and in
Yeah.
the bottom, because the givers who get taken advantage of
Yeah.
and don't have time to do their own work because they're helping everyone else, those people struggle. But the ones who are very generous and want to help people, he describes as 5-minute favors where you do something simple that can connect someone or help two people connect together who they don't know each other, but you can help them. I just think that that's such a powerful way to operate in the world, and I would 100% give that advice to myself at 20.
100%. There's a guy in the music industry, I guess, maybe movie industry. I don't know. He's a guy called Clarence Avant. I think it's Clarence Avant,
Oh,
and
okay.
he has helped some of the people in this world in the industry excel. And why did he do it? He used to say, I didn't get rich off of it. I mean, he was worth some money. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't because he was doing it for that monetary return. Right? It was just embedded into him. And and he died not too long ago. And it's amazing that the people who surrounded him and he helped, and the good things they said about him. And I saw a documentary on him on Netflix, set in Netflix or Prime. And it was just amazing. I hadn't heard of him before, but then I realized, wow, what an incredible human being.
Was there anything we've talked about softer skills? We've talked about patience, balance of patience and impatience. We've talked about reaching out and networking earlier on in your career, skill wise. So let's go talk about something harder skills. Is there anything that you tell yourself now? You kind of came through the banking industry, and there's sort of nuances to different elements within the financial service industry, but just curious if there's anything that jumps out at you, especially when you talk to companies and you get feedback on students who are now out there.
Bottom line is, if you understand sort of the direction that you plan on taking, or you want to get in there, work backwards. You must always work backwards and find out, okay, what, and that, of course, this comes with talking to people, your connections, etc., reading, researching. But you have to not think. I had this conversation with a guy who graduated from University of Toronto recently in political science. And he was saying, well, I was thinking about the financial services industry because not obviously, but he hasn't found a job within a year. He hasn't really pushed himself or anything. But I was thinking of getting in the financial services industry, but I was thinking to do some of those courses to get in there is going to take a long time. I said, well, you've been not working for a year, and then the next year you can be saying the same thing. So what should you have done? Well, there's many different organizations that offer certifications, courses, etc., that can help you prepare. And these industries take a lot of people who don't just have, for example, financial services, finance skills, if you want to call it that. But if you come to the table and you get some sponsors and you make connections, and then you say to them, well, I've done my Canadian securities course on my CIM from CSI and or my Wall Street prep or breaking into Wall Street, financial modeling courses. They didn't even hear that you did a political science degree. You know what I mean? So it's like, those are the types of skills from a technical point of view. So, and I just chose the financial services industry. Maybe he be being biased, but bottom line is the same applies to many different industries. And we all know that now and even before, the skills go hand in hand, behavioral and technical. So start skilling up on the behavioral side. If you feel that, if you've talked to people and they said, you need to improve in this area, well, don't waste time. Start learning how to improve in that area. Get those skills to get up to that area. And then when you put the whole package together, now you're a more powerful human being and easier to assimilate into whatever industry you're going to go into.
Well, it's a funny thing too. I think when you alluded to just there about, ask people about what are the skills you ought to be developing. If you give someone that advice, they go do it and come back to you. Hasn't their credibility been enhanced substantially? Don't you feel
100%.
like, yeah, this person, they've got hustle. I'm more willing to help them out a little more.
That's exactly it. So what have you developed there? You just developed a sponsor. You see where I'm going with this? And you just laid it out correctly there. They have more respect for you. You come back and say, hey, I did it. Okay, wow, you did. I didn't think you would. But anyway, let's move forward.
Well, and the reason you chuckled when you said that, but it's true because I've given some of this type of advice, and you've got some really interesting new angles here that I'm going to incorporate. But I've given this advice to a bunch of people, and it's not as many people as you would think who take advantage.
No, it's not as many. Exactly. Like, and the guy was given the the advice to the political science who I just met. I was at a blockchain futuristic conference for 2 days this week, and he was there, and he got a free ticket through, a person. And he said, well, this is not really my thing, but I'll come. And he came out there and he met so many people there who talked to him about their industries, et cetera, et cetera. And he left there with such a wealth of knowledge and a new perspective on life, on his career, on what he may be looking for. So if he didn't do that, he would have sat at home and not, first of all, got all these connections. Secondly, have the knowledge. So, bottom line, get out there,
Absolutely. Well, you're trying to, certainly in those type of situations, you're really just trying to grow your surface area for luck, right?
Yes.
Lightning strikes somewhere, you want to give as big a place for that lightning of fortune to strike for you. And
Exactly.
going out and doing these events, going to these events is a great way to do it. And somebody's just experimenting because there's some unit and it won't work out, and you'll be like, well, okay, well that didn't turn into anything. You got to keep trying. That's what makes the difference.
Exactly.
Garth, let's wrap up with our traditional two or three questions. What's one thing our listeners can do and implement tomorrow to make themselves more in demand from a career perspective?
Well, first of all, connect.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking volume. I'm not talking quantity. I'm talking quality, right?
Yep.
Be strategic about it. And how you're going to be strategic is you're going to learn from the smart ones. So, they say, work smart, not hard. Well, I don't know if that ever applies, but, you got to work smart and hard. But the bottom line is trying to work smart to find not just who to connect to, but how to connect to those people, where you should be connected, etc. So do it smartly, but have a roadmap and have a strategic plan to do it. Be yourself. Don't try to be a robot. Don't try to be someone you're not. Be yourself and bring that to the table with integrity, honesty, etc. And build that resilience in you also as you're doing that. So, and finally, take advantage of what's out there, the information that's out there. Do not complain that you can't find the information or you can't get here or you can't do that. It's out there. You can get it. You can talk to people, which by talking to people helps you, as we've gone through this, develop sponsors and people who just take to you, etc. So take advantage of that and really, really, really don't say you're going to put it off until next week or next month or whatever. Just act. When you've done your strategy and you put your plan together, start acting. And don't take 5 years to put your plan together,
Great. I think that's some great stuff there, Garth. Let me ask, are there any books or podcasts that you'd recommend to our audience? When you counsel students and you talk to companies in terms of helping students bridge that gap and learn, is there anything that jumps out, any books or podcasts?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I go back to Adam Grant. So Work Life with Adam Grant, which is an Apple podcast. Okay. I'm not sure if you listened to that one, but Work Life with Adam Grant. And there's also the first 90 days. Obviously, that's about when you get your job, right? The first 90 days.
Awesome. That sounds great. And then Garth, the last question I have for you before we wrap up, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know you have a very busy life and it's really generous of you to share your time with us. So what I like to do is ask what, me or our audience, this is going to be out there for a while probably. Is there anything that if you could wave a magic wand, is there any problem or anything you're working on, anything you'd like to fix or whatever, anything personally, professionally, that if you could wave a magic wand and fix it, you would do? And I'd love for us or our audience, do anything we can to help you.
Yeah, I think, the bottom line is to point your thumb at yourself and figure out what has been holding you back, right? And attack that head on. For me, the problem is always, how better can I become? And sometimes even myself, I don't address that issue or that problem by talking to the right people and being, vulnerable, if you know what I mean. How better can I become and people can use it in their personal life and in their work life, right? And I think you always have to be a stage that you feel you haven't fully accomplished everything. You always have to be hungry. You always have to be out there saying, okay, I need to move on to the next. I need to get help getting to the next, and always that way. And the problem that I find with a lot of students sometimes is when they get into the organization, for example, I always say they relax. They relax, but they feel that now the train should just be pulling them along. But no, you have to have that same resilience and that same mindset of trying to improve, talking to the right people, getting the right sponsors, doing the right, competency learning, continuous learning, and always stay hungry. Always stay hungry. So waving the magic wand, I wish there was a magic wand that can always keep someone hungry and moving forward.
Okay. Garth, thanks so much for your time. That was a super interesting conversation. I guess people can find you on LinkedIn and
Yep.
in general and those sort of places. It's been a great chat with you and a lot of takeaways for people, and I really appreciate the time. I hope you have a great day and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, same here, Ashley. And it's always a pleasure talking with you. And I think this was a very fruitful podcast. And I hope it provides great benefit to listeners. Everybody needs some help somewhere.